Welcome to Poverty in the United States, some basic statistics. In other portions of this course, we've studied how we calculate these statistics for poverty and also some of the causes of poverty. These are just some updated statistics to give you an idea of how different demographic groups in the United States fall in the overall range of poverty statistics. As we go through this section and segment of the course, be focused primarily on data from the United States Census Bureau, which produces reports every year or two outlining changes in poverty. Our focus on this will be 2022. So this is a very interesting kind of cartoon as I scroll through and kind of follow quite a few of them on social media. And, it really gets to the heart of a lot of our poverty related influences in the United States. And that is that at the end of the day, many people's problems when it comes to health, when it comes to childcare, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to pretty much any statistic in the US, is affected in some way by their levels of poverty. So, in discussing these issues of poverty, we're really talking about trying to solve many kind of social ills in the United States. Now, in this data, the US Census Bureau produces a report called Poverty in the United States. And this is a great measure of all the poverty statistics in the US. There's also a related report, which we won't cover in this discussion, that's called Income in the United States. It also breaks out some of the different areas of demographic groups and poverty and income in the United States and how that relates to poverty. Our focus is primarily going to be on this report, some of them directly from the data that was produced by the Census Bureau and some other charts that I created myself using that data. So this is the actual official federal poverty guidelines in the United States. We see there's a sliding scale here depending on age group for one, and then whether or not there's a two-person household and how many children are in this. As you look through here, for the person that's under 65, poverty level is set at about $15,000, and over 65, about $14,000. And two people, typically with no children, would be a little bit less than $20,000. So the poverty levels are certainly very low in the United States. And when you just start to think about how you would afford your housing costs, your food costs, your medical costs, transportation costs, and so forth on this amount of money, the poverty level is set fairly low. So let's just take a look at the overall poverty rate in the United States. At the end of this slide deck, I will show you how the different programs that we have in the United States affect poverty rates. But this is the kind of long-term, what we call secular trend of poverty in the United States. And we see that, from the 1950s up to 2022, we see a fairly sizable drop when we take a look at the 50s into the beginning of the 70s, an increase during the Reagan years. And we've pretty much, depending on the economy, stayed kind of in that 11 to 15% rate of poverty in the United States over the course of this time period. Part of that great descent is the programs that kind of came about as a result of the Great Society and kind of the influence of Social Security kicking in completely after the New Deal. But we see that there hasn't been much progress in eliminating poverty over the last, say, 50 years. Now, not surprisingly, as you take a look at these charts, all of the long kind of the gray sections of the chart show times that we've hit recessions. Naturally, since many people become more unemployed during recessions, we tend to see that the unemployment rate, as well as the poverty rates, increase during those recessions. And oftentimes, as the job market kind of gets sustained and we gain steam, you'll see those poverty rates decline. There's also oftentimes a lagging kind of indicator, as we see here, that just because a recession ends does not necessarily mean that unemployment gains strength and the employment market gains strength, so people can remain in poverty even after we see recessions end. Now, there was that little blip. You can see it around 2020, in which the poverty rate dropped quite a bit. A lot of that was due to COVID relief programs that helped people in need. And as that COVID relief money started to run out, we see a slight rise in the amount of people that are in poverty in the United States. Let's take a look at the idea of child child poverty rates in the United States, and we see that they're higher than any other group, and particularly higher among minority groups. So as we look here, we see that the poverty rate for non-Hispanic whites among children is only about 7.2%, whereby as we go up to Hispanic children, almost 20%, and for Black American children, 17.8%. And Asians are kind of lower in the scale with poverty rates a little bit under 10%, kind of tracking more closely with non-Hispanic whites in the United States. So age is certainly a factor in the United States when it comes to poverty, and we have a fairly higher rate of child poverty than we do among other groups. Now, education also, not surprisingly, contributes to people's impoverishedness. So if we take a look at everybody that's 25 years of age or older in the United States in 2022, about 9.9% of those people lived in poverty. What we see is that there's a gradual decline in the amount of poverty as you increase the amount of education that you have. So those people with no high school diploma, about 1/4 of people without a high school diploma live in poverty. High school, you see a big jump down to about 13.3%, some college 9.3%, and finally a bachelor's degree or higher, only about 4.3% of people in the United States that have a bachelor's degree or higher are in poverty. This is not surprising, as we see that on average, people within college education tend to make about $1 million more over the course of their lifetime than those people that do not have a college degree. So we often see wealth run hand in hand with college education and educational attainment. So this follows, basic trend lines that we have. As far as regions and places in the United States, we do see a disparity between the Midwest and the Northeast and the West tend to have lower poverty rates than the South. The South does have the highest rates of poverty in the country, and also state policies there tend to be a little bit less lenient on getting social programs. What's really interesting is when we start to break this down between those people who live in metropolitan areas, either inside or outside the major cities, and then those people that live outside kind of these metropolitan areas. And we oftentimes focus on poverty in cities. So we see that, inside the principal cities, so every metropolitan area has a big principal city, whether it's, the Philadelphia metropolitan area, the New York City metropolitan area, Chicago metropolitan area. Those big cities tend to have more poverty than do the surrounding suburbs. So outside that principal city, you see kind of in the suburban areas, as we call them, they tend to have less poverty. But the interesting thing is, once you get outside these metropolitan areas that we primarily consider to be rural, we see the poverty rates rise. So there's a big disparity then in between kind of what we consider inner city and suburbs. And then again, this big jump as you move out of the suburbs into the rural areas of an area. So, that's another thing we don't oftentimes think about, kind of rural poverty in the same vein as we would, poverty within cities. But certainly there's distressing disparities between the two of those things. Another thing that's very much of interest is the poverty levels by type of family type that we have. So again, this is data from 2022. So break it out by a number of different types of families that we have. So all families in primary families. So you're living with, with people and there's children. So in primary families, about 9.4%, which is you can see from the other stuff is, a little bit lower than the national average. Children in a family, in their primary family that are under age 18, about 14.8%. And as we'll see with all of these other statistics, when you have children under the age of 6, you'll see that the poverty rate tends to rise in families. Now, what's interesting here is that we can break this out into 3 separate other types of primary families. The first being married couples, the second being in families with a female head of household, and then finally in families with a male head of household. So the best poverty scenario that we see is people that are in married couple families. So in married couple families with no kids, poverty rate's only about 5.4%. When there are children under age 18 in married couple families, about 6.9%, which you see is quite a bit below the national average. And for children under 6, the same 6.9%. So married couple families have the lowest rates of poverty among people that are in families. The highest rates of poverty tend to be found in families with a female head of household. Just all families, female head of household, 24, more, almost a quarter live in poverty. But then when we start taking a look at female head of household with children, if there's children under the age of 18, well over 1/3 at 37.2% are in poverty. And the younger the children are, the more likely that that family is going to be in poverty. So, very nearly half of the people, households with a female head of household and a child under age 6 are families that live in poverty. The male head of household tends to be quite a bit lower, but nonetheless more than the average for families in general, and certainly more than families in married couple families. So, the rates for children under age 18 are 18%, and related children under age 6, again, very close to about a quarter of all families. So there is a difference in the type of family and household with children as the rate of poverty. Now, finally, government programs do make a difference in poverty, even though we don't generally calculate that as such. But when you start to take a look at some of the basic programs like Social Security, supplemental nutrition programs, housing subsidies, child tax credits, and so forth, what we see is that these help get, significant amount of people out of poverty. So about almost 29 million people are raised out of poverty by Social Security every year, and the payments that come along with that. So not surprisingly, most of those people are over the age of 65. As we go down here, we see that millions of people are in some way pulled out of poverty by government programs. There are some things that kind of affect more people in poverty. Having to pay income tax once you get beyond the tax refunds can push people into poverty. Medical expenses, certainly a big cause of financial stress on families and people in the United States. And Social Security, FICA, when you have to pay, that's one of what we call a payroll tax that can help to push people into poverty as well. So in sum total, we see that the kind of long-term secular trends over the last, 3/4 of a century have been good for poverty, but we've really been kind of in a holding pattern for the last 50 years. It goes up and down depending on the state of the economy. And we do see some disparities when it comes to race, when it comes to educational attainment, and it comes to types of families that you live in. So just a quick overview of what we would see when we talk about the idea of poverty statistics in the United States.